All right, everybody. So we are tracking an increasing risk for severe thunderstorms today, I'm sorry to say. And as the morning has worn on, we finally started to see some showers and thunderstorms popping up. We have a couple of heavy ones out there now, but the big headline I want to let you know is that very soon we're going to be placed under a tornado watch. It's not in effect yet, but the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center is saying there's about an 80% chance, which is almost 100, right, that they're going to go ahead and place our area under a tornado watch. It'll likely be issued at some point like around noontime and probably be in effect until about 6 or maybe 7 o'clock tonight. Remember, a watch means that conditions are favorable for tornadoes and severe thunderstorms within that area, and it's going to cover at least a dozen counties, most of our area. If an individual storm does start to rotate and produce a severe thunderstorm, hail, damaging winds, or even a tornado, then a warning would be issued, and that's for a short period of time for a very specific location. Like it'll say, the west side of Houston, for example, and it'll name specific neighborhoods and for a limited amount of time, from 1 to 1:30 or something like that. So that would be a warning. A watch would be in effect for several hours for the entire area, and I think we'll have one of those issued here pretty shortly. As we head to the graphics here, the new development is that the severe weather outlook now has increased a little bit for our area. So this morning we were in that yellow area where the severe thunderstorm chance was likely, like a 2 out of 5. Well, now that's been moved up in parts of our area to a 3 out of 5, to the very likely category. That does include the city of Houston. It includes Baytown. It includes Crosby, up to the Woodlands and Conroe. All of those spots are now in this area that's at an even more elevated risk for seeing tornadoes today. In addition, we also just have a general severe thunderstorm risk, which means that some of the storms could produce hail. This is specifically the tornado risk, and it's gone up. It's not in the high category, but even this category is fairly significant. It's defined as a 10% chance of a tornado occurring within 25 miles of any point. It's really a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. It's just like, imagine a circle that's about the size of Harris County or really any of the other counties. So let's just say roughly the size of your county. There's about a 10% chance that a tornado would be taking place in that area. So 1 out of 10. I mean, that's, you figure that doesn't happen very often. So when you add everything up across the entire area, it's very likely that we'll have a few, at least a couple, maybe a few of tornado warnings today. So it's definitely something that you'll want to have your Fox 26 weather app set up so that there's a setting in there where you could either have it just default to Houston or you can have it follow you, basically. So you want to put follow me, because that way if you're driving around, if you're at work, if you're wherever you're going, it will let you know specifically if there's a warning in effect for your area, instead of you just getting bombarded by warnings that don't affect you for other parts of town, right? So this is how things have developed here over the last 3 hours with that front approaching our area, and you'll see there that that adjustment at the very end is that increased risk heading into our area. So we have several areas of downpours across the area currently. None of them is severe, but the heaviest batch of rain just passing by Baytown, and that's moving up toward Humble and Barrett and Sheldon and back over to around Liberty and Dayton. So look for your weather to really take a turn for the worse here pretty quickly. These things are moving from south to north very quickly, about probably 30 to 40 miles an hour. So they're making pretty good progress and occasionally flaring up with a lot of lightning and then kind of settling back down. So here's a close view. This is taking you out here to the east side around 225 in the Beltway, Highway 90 in the Beltway, I-10, of course, Baytown East Freeway. Channelview getting slammed right now. That's going to be moving up toward the northeast side of Harris County. And then we have another batch of rain there that's headed toward Liberty and Dayton. These are non-severe thunderstorms, but it's heavy rain, and not even impossible. There could be a little bit of small hail coming out of some of those, not expected to be damaging. Just racing across, I mean, this is a loop here of the last hour. And look how fast, I mean, these things are actually going, probably faster than, probably closer to 40 miles an hour. That batch at the bottom of your screen right here moved from Cypress all the way up to north of Lake Conroe in just the last hour. Another batch of rain out there to the west of Highway 6, about halfway between Hempstead and College Station. Also not severe, but on the strong side. The temps are starting to warm up as well, and that's beginning to fuel these storms as well. So Angleton, for example, 77. So on your way up, getting pretty close to 80. This time of the year, obviously, it's unusually warm. So that warm air is coming in. It's still relatively cool off toward the north, where you'll see there, like Huntsville, temperatures are in the low 60s. So there's a little bit of a clash there. And when that warmer air comes in, we call that the warm sector. And so that's going to lead to increased instability as well. So here's the futurecast, and taking us here through the 11 o'clock hour, this model, which is the high resolution rapid refresh, the HRRR model, is showing rain around here for the 11 o'clock hour. So this is basically right now. Is it 100% accurate? No, because I mean, we can see it's showing all of Houston with rain starting at 11:15, and that isn't happening. But we can still look for trends. So, let's go ahead and take a look at how it's showing things developing as we head toward 1 p.m. So 1 o'clock, we start to see a little bit more substantial rain. It's color coded here so that when you see those pink colors or even that like gray and black show up, that's where you have the most intense rain and probably hail that'll be taking place, at least according to the computer model. So that's popping up here as of 1 o'clock, and now we progress through about 3, and this is going to be the time frame where we have to watch from Houston north and eastward for the possible development of a couple of tornadoes, and then things should start to ease up a little bit probably after about 6 or 6:30. For the majority of the area, it still may be a severe threat along the coastline, but for most of the area, it looks like it is going to stay on the rough side. So we're going to go ahead and take a break here in a moment. We do have, Bradley, I think we have time hopefully to run Allison's hurricane review story. So right after the break, we will have that for you. Stick around.
Well, it was a very busy hurricane season, and early on in the season, we had one of the strongest named storms that early. That was Hurricane Beryl. You probably remember it was the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record. It did make landfall here in southeast Texas. It was a Category 1 storm at that time. July 8th was the date. We saw damaging winds and heavy rain, and both of those combined led to nearly 3 million folks across southeast Texas without power for several days. So we did have some direct, unfortunately, deaths from Beryl here in southeast Texas, and then a few indirect ones. Remember, I mentioned folks without power for so long. It was hot and it was humid. So unfortunately, there was a lot of heat exhaustion in the area. Now, I do want to take you out to a look at what the radar looked like back on July 8th. We did have landfall in Matagorda, Texas early in the morning. I was working with our Chief Meteorologist, Mike Iskovitz. The thing is, here's that center of the storm, the eye that made its way all the way into Fort Bend County and even over Houston. Right around the eye, some of the strongest winds, and boy, did we have those very strong winds move inland, as you can see, and all that heavy rain that was mainly centered on the north and east side of the storm. Now, I do want to take you through Beryl's history because it broke so many records, and we'll get through some of those in just a moment. But it started just off the west coast of Africa. Honestly, this season, we didn't see a ton of storms make their way through what we call the main development region, the Caribbean, and the Gulf of Mexico. But this one, oh boy, it stood the test of time. So here it is as just an area of low pressure beginning. And you can see on this track here, the different colors show the intensity and just how quickly it went from a Category 1 to briefly a 3, and then into that Category 4 storm before it made its initial landfall. And I'll go through the landfalls in a moment as well. But once it made its way back into the open waters. Now we talk about a landfall, and for it to really decrease in intensity, it needs to be over land for quite some time. Well, guess what? These islands are not very big. So yes, it made an initial landfall, but it moved into the warm waters in the Caribbean where it was able to strengthen into a Category 5 storm. This was on July 2nd. So the earliest Category 5 storm that we have seen ever in the Atlantic. Then it continued to make its way across the Caribbean, eventually making a second landfall across the Yucatan. It was about a Category 2 hurricane at that time. Now, I remember at this point when we were covering this storm, this is right after the 4th of July. So a lot of folks wanted to be down here traveling, enjoying the holiday. But then it was all eyes on the western Gulf of Mexico. Where was this going? You know, if the storm would have made landfall further south, it would have had more time to decrease in intensity. But as you can see, nope, wasn't over land for very long, moved back into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, re-intensified to a Category 1 storm, and there it made landfall and wreaked some havoc across southeast Texas, but really beyond. We'll go through more in the history of these storms, but it did create a tornado outbreak, 3-day span from Texas all the way up to about Michigan. So very intense there. And it wasn't, you know, the only storm that brought some very strong winds across the Gulf. And we'll be getting to that a bit later on as well. But here's a look at the 3 landfalls from Hurricane Beryl. The first one was on Carriacou Island in Grenada. That was back on July 1st. So that was a Category 4 storm. Boy, did they see the brunt of it. Maximum winds were at 150 miles per hour. And then remember, it made that secondary landfall in Mexico on July 5th, Category 2 storm, maximum sustained winds of 110 miles per hour. And then lastly, moving into Matagorda, Texas, July 8th, Cat 1 strength, but still this storm packed a punch everywhere it went. So I mentioned it was the earliest Category 5 on record. It was also the earliest Category 4 hurricane on record. In the Atlantic, June 30th is when it became that Cat 4. Now, the strongest maximum sustained winds were at 165 miles per hour. That was at peak, and that was the strongest Atlantic hurricane prior to August. Again, ever on record, just continues to break these records. We had 4.5 days of Category 3 strength or higher. That is the most for a storm named prior to August as well. But it wasn't just Beryl that made history this hurricane season. We had several storms. And yes, Francine made landfall in Louisiana and brought very strong winds, heavy rain, and some damage there. But it was Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton that were practically back to back that just brought so much damage and devastation across not only the state of Florida, but Helene made devastation across portions of the Carolinas, which they are still cleaning up to this day, as well as in Georgia. So let's get to the overview of this season. We had 18 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and of those hurricanes, 5 being major. The predictions, we were right within them. I will say maybe the named storms were on the lower end of things, but it only takes one hurricane for it to be a deadly and very costly season, and that's exactly what we saw, and again, well above average. So an overview, we had 5 landfalling hurricanes along the Gulf Coast. Beryl was the earliest Cat 5 on record. Milton was the strongest in the Gulf since Rita. You remember Milton? It strengthened so quickly. I mean, it went from a tropical storm to a major hurricane, and what seemed like overnight, it was probably a bit longer than that, but just to show how quickly things strengthened in those warm waters in the Gulf. Basically, nothing was stopping these hurricanes. And we don't have officially that this was the second costliest, but what they're estimating right now, $200 billion, it could be really just one of the costliest that we've seen on record. So here's a look at the storms. We had Alberto, just a tropical storm. Then we had that Category 5 Beryl. Chris was a tropical storm. Then we had Debbie, Ernesto, Francine, all hurricanes. Gordon, tropical storm. Helene, major hurricane. Then we had Hurricane Isaac, Joyce, Kirk was also packing a punch, but it was really Milton right at the end of the season that just brought devastation across portions of Florida. And then Rafael, not necessarily impacting the U.S., but still something that we were watching toward the end of the season. Now we had Hurricane Beryl. I kind of went through, obviously, the statistics on what we saw here in southeast Texas. But remember I mentioned that there was a tornado outbreak after. Yeah, 67 tornadoes reported over a 3-day span. That went from Texas all the way up to the Midwest and even into Canada, I believe, after that. That is a lot of tornadoes, and it was right on the line of what was Beryl. Then we go out to Hurricane Debbie. Peak winds, Category 1 strength at 80 miles per hour. It actually made 2 landfalls First one was in Florida, and then it crossed over, went into the Atlantic, and then made landfall in South Carolina. We saw historic rainfall in Quebec days later. So I think something that we see the trend of this hurricane season was it wasn't just what we saw along the coast, it was all those impacts that were felt inland. And we'll see that in a big way with some of these storms coming up. We had Hurricane Francine making landfall in Louisiana, 100 miles per hour. It was a Category 2 storm. We did see some flooding along portions of the northeastern Gulf of Mexico, but then here we go with Helene. Peak intensity, Category 4 strength with 140 mile per hour winds. So it made landfall in the Big Bend of Florida, and that region has seen several storms over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years, but this did bring historic storm surge. It moved through the peninsula of Florida and the Panhandle rather quickly, but it was a catastrophic flooding that we saw in Georgia to the Carolinas. I mean, they're still cleaning up. We saw just homes get tore down from the rivers that were just picking up so much debris, and it's just devastating to see what they are still cleaning up after from Hurricane Helene. So again, a lot of those impacts were felt inland, far away from where we saw landfall. And then Hurricane Milton, peak intensity Cat 5 strength in the Gulf of Mexico. We saw 180 mile per hour sustained winds. It made landfall in Siesta Key, Florida as a Category 3. So thankfully we saw a decrease in intensity before that final landfall. 120 mile per hour sustained winds. We saw historic rainfall, flooding in Florida, as well as a tornado outbreak. And you remember, well, a lot of folks getting hit just weeks before by the previous storm. They had all their debris out. Let's say that their home got flooded. They took out their carpet, their couches, whatever it was, and it was sitting out front. And then we had this storm that hit. And that just, created even more debris that they were cleaning up, the flooding inland. So you guys, it was a very busy 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. But just know, whatever is ahead, you have us here at Fox 26, your Gulf Coast Weather Authority, to bring you the latest updates.
Well, I wish I could say the weather was going to be fine, but our chances of seeing severe storms are increasing. Now, this is the latest outlook from NOAA's Storm Prediction Center, and they classify tornado risk into the categories you see up there at the top. And where they have those bold black lines, or hash marks is what they call them, that's where there's a chance for what they call significant tornadoes. So that means maybe an EF2 or even stronger. So that's not something we see around here really commonly. It does happen. It's not a guarantee, but it's something that we need to be aware of today. Right now, a lot of places have no rain, but we do have some heavy batches of rain moving into Liberty County and then also out to the west of town. So right now these are not severe. We don't have any warnings on them, but things are probably going to start to go downhill here very shortly. Tune in to Fox 26 News at noon. On the radar and our severe weather threat. See you in about 30 minutes.